Natural disasters know no respite. They might be foreseen, but in most cases, populations must suffer through them, often while totally helpless. From New Orleans to Indonesia, no country, no people is sheltered. These disasters cause increasingly greater destructions. How do you explain that? What is at stake is man's increased vulnerability. Population growth, runaway urbanization, high-rise building, a damaged environment are just a few of the factors explaining expanding human and material casualties. For a decade, the French Red Cross has helped populations to be better prepared against natural disasters. To reduce a disaster's impact is first and foremost to save lives.
A natural disaster is not some inescapable fate. A natural disaster is first a climatic phenomenon, be it a hurricane, floods, drought. The phenomenon will become a disaster if it encounters vulnerability. This means that it will have to occur in a densely populated area, with economic and environmental consequences, and not in a desertic area. An earthquake in the middle of a desert is not a disaster. As a rule, nature is stronger than us, but our actions can address the problem of the degree of vulnerability of exposed populations. The aim is therefore to reduce that vulnerability in order to be better prepared and equipped to confront the disaster if and when it occurs. Attempts at learning how to cope or getting prepared for a natural disaster may seem a strange idea. One always feels that a natural disaster is essentially unforeseen. The most important may be to think at the onset that a disaster is not an unavoidable fate. It can be foreseen. One can get ready for it. One can even mitigate its effects through preliminary work and not start when disaster strikes. By then, it's too late.
The December 2004 tsunami that devastated Southeast Asia was an unthinkable magnitude. Had the populations been informed and prepared, had they been alerted and evacuated, many lives could have been saved. This terrifying event struck the collective consciousness and prompted people to act before a natural disaster strikes. It can save lives and property. This is why the French Red Cross sets up programs on preparing for natural disasters and lowering risks. These actions are given top priority. 10% of the funds received for the tsunami have been earmarked for it. Earthquakes in Iran and Pakistan in 2003 and 2005 showed that it may take several weeks for rescue teams to reach remote, destroyed villages. In the meantime, the populations have to fend for themselves, rescue one another, and survive. An advanced knowledge of how to react in front of natural disasters enables entire communities to save lives and property. In order not to be just a victim, they must be the actors of their own survival. An up-close and hands-on action with the communities enables them to react efficiently to an unforeseen cataclysmic event. These actions are undertaken on a priority base for the poorest country, as they are also the most vulnerable. They account for 90% of all the world's disaster victims. The damages are in the billions of dollars. The entire economy is affected, infrastructure is destroyed, years of work and investment are erased, poverty increases. Vulnerability to natural disasters and the poverty level of the population creates a vicious circle. This is the case for countries constantly hit by natural disasters. Take, for instance, Haiti and its population of 8 million. Between 2000 and 2005, it was hit by 9 hurricanes, 11 floods, and 1 drought. The state simply does not have the structures or organization to cope with such disasters. Human, material, and financial needs are insufficient. In such a context, the support the French Red Cross has provided to Haiti since 2001 is more than a necessity. It bolsters the capacities of Haiti's Red Cross, it keeps the population informed and prepared.
Haiti is a country totally exposed to national disasters such as hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, landslides. If no preventive measures are taken, the number of victims will increase. When people are prepared, which is what prevention does, people are warned in time. Temporary shelters have been set up in order to move people early. As soon as the incoming disaster is announced, it has reduced the impact of the disasters to the populations. The Haitian Red Cross airs messages to increase conscientiousness and inform the populations of existing threats and consequences of natural disasters. Together with the French Red Cross, the Haitian Red Cross creates a disaster commission for the lower Artibonite region. When a natural disaster is announced, the lower disaster commissions start warning the populations, especially the most vulnerable ones.
There are other examples of such partnerships between the various Red Crosses. In 2004-2005, Hurricanes Ivan and Emily devastated the island of Grenada. The French Red Cross responded to the call for help by the Grenada Red Cross, totally overwhelmed by the sheer size of the disaster. These hurricanes caused very important damages. More than 85% of all habitations and buildings were hit. Thanks to international solidarity and the work done by all the inhabitants, material damages were largely repaired. The French Red Cross has implemented a program for the reconstruction of habitations. More than 800 houses were rebuilt. Roofs and structures have been made hurricane resistant. As part of this program, the French Red Cross has launched a community preparedness program to prevent the reoccurrence of such a situation. The first step is to inform the population on how to behave under hurricane conditions. The other is to create local disaster committees. They are made of volunteers whose task is to identify the needs, list the most vulnerable individuals, and relay the information to the relief teams. They also prepare evacuation plans. In all, the Red Cross works jointly with 32 communities. More than 700 people have been trained. First aid kits have been given out. These measures will let the people face disaster when they first strike. And the Red Cross has also implemented micro-projects.
The main target of these micro-projects is the reduction of the exposure of most community members. Micro-projects must be understood as the implementation of the infrastructure that will allow for a mitigation of the disaster and population exposure. It means that we are going to implement micro-projects for each risk sector that we have identified. We can build bridges that will enable people an easier river crossing. We can prepare drainage canals avoiding the formation of flooded areas. We can provide stairs enabling people access to the houses. We can also focus on clean-up campaigns. The philosophy set up by the Red Cross has been to privilege the community work, to make them more responsible, protect these same communities and to help them not to become victims so that they have the means to face up to catastrophes. The aim of the French Red Cross is that when it is gone, these committees remain active and help people to work, create projects, protect themselves, and in turn create other micro-projects. All we want, and what counts most, is the creation of dynamics.
Mount Tranquil is a community known as vulnerable because we have a lot of disabled, small children, pregnant people, unemployed single parents, and stuff like that. This area is prone to flooding. This house right here, when the drain is flooded, it comes into the yard, so that is why we're trying to limit the amount of water that comes in the yard. That is why we're doing the drain, opening the top so that the water can flow easily. The project we're working in, though, is under the French Red Cross. The community that we put together are working to help complete the program. It's not for money, it's just self-help. We work on Saturdays and Sundays.
Well, everybody used to be in their home wondering what we would do. And due to the French Red Cross, we improve a lot. Yeah, everybody come out, uniting together, fixing the drain, everybody getting a meal. When we make juice, we cook food, we give them. And children as well as the ladies and men come out to work. Yes, and that's very good. So the drain is good benefit. Yeah.
Trying to mitigate the consequences of natural disasters is news. This is a participative work action that commits the communities. Some success stories. In Mozambique in 2001, 34 inhabitants were protected from floods thanks to emergency teams. Same year in Cuba, 600,000 evacuated as Hurricane Michelle closed in. Efficient information, mobilization of volunteers. As a result, costs remain low. Few organizations focus on the consequences of natural disaster. Humanitarian Services of the European Commission is fully aware of it.
Mitigation and preparedness were until a very recent date essentially considered more a cost than an investment. Yet one knows full well that such actions will result in avoiding some disasters and colossal costs. Mitigation and preparedness' only problem is that when efficient, they remain invisible. I think that this has to be taken into account. Be it for donors or actors of humanitarian actions, visibility rests with presence in the field, saving lives rather than planning for efficient actions.
Risk prevention is not a domain that sells well in the media. It is a discrete activity and yet an essential one. Its importance becomes obvious over time and is one of the cornerstones in a logic of sustainable development.
Looking at the Millennium Targets defined by the United Nations, they all have a dimension that could take into account natural disasters mitigation. The word was never spoken. Using a very real Millennium Target, education, for example, 60% of all schools to be built will collapse on the pupils at the first earthquake. That aspect of the problem has not been taken into account. The reason? It was never fully understood, and because the link with lowering poverty has not always been connected.
So-called natural events only become disasters because men are exposed to them. Refusal of such a fate implies the need to help populations to do what it takes to prepare against disasters. Beyond emergency help, always headlining the news, solidarity implies creating, at their earliest age, key reflexes that will make them actors of their self-protection. Act today, better to save tomorrow.